world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, FinTech, and the future. The future of banking is here. Hello and welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Today we're thrilled to be joined by Russ Shaw. Russ is the founder of Tech London Advocates, TLA, a private sector-led group of leaders promoting London's technology sector and addressing the issues on the horizon. The group is a not-for-profit community of individuals with aspirations to build and promote London as a world-leading digital and technology city. Russ has led a long and illustrious career in technology and telecom, including serving as the Chief Marketing Officer of O2, the Global Innovation Director for Telefonica, and Managing Director EMEA for Skype. In addition to his work at TLA, Russ is a non-executive director of 3 tech companies, 2 of which are publicly listed, and an angel investor. If you enjoy today's show, please subscribe on iTunes or your podcast platform of choice and leave us a review. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please welcome Russ Shaw. Russ, welcome to Rebank.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Your work straddles the public and private sectors with a focus on tech innovation, education, and investment. What are your main areas of focus at this point?
Right. Well, I think maybe to address that in kind of 2 areas. One is around the communities. We have the Tech London Advocates community, but we also have Global Tech Advocates, which is the parent organizations. And there's now 7 other sibling groups in addition to the London group, all around the world in places like California, Shanghai, Singapore, and the Nordics, and Spain, etc. So my focus is to make sure that the London group continues to grow and expand, and we keep adding more and more working groups. We will be adding more global tech advocate groups this year. Going to Colombia in March to launch Tech Bogota Advocates. And we've got groups in formation stage for Paris, Italy, Scotland, and Tokyo. So I hope to launch groups in those cities and regions this year. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is really about what are some of the key issues that we really need to be vocal about as a private sector-led independent group of tech leaders. And the number one issue that continues to be top of everyone's mind is talent, shortage of talent, and the lack of diversity in talent. And so there's kind of 2 strands of that we're going much deeper into. One is around digital skills and ensuring that we have a British workforce that is equipped for the future in terms of having more and more people across the country with all levels of digital skills, from the most basic to the most advanced. The lack of diversity in the sector is a huge issue. I mean, it's 80% white men. So we need more women. We need more Black and minority ethnic groups to come into the sector. We've now got a TLA LGBTQ group. So I really want to make sure that as we build the talent across our industry, that we really take a look at diversity. So that's one piece. The second piece that goes in sync with that is around immigration policy. As we prepare to leave the European Union and the impact of the referendum, there are a number of things that we need to address. One is, do we have a fit-for-purpose visa and immigration policy if we're going to lose freedom of movement from the EU? And how do we ensure that we have sufficient quantities of Tier 1, Tier 2 visas to really send a message to the world that we're open for business and we want the world's best talent to come here? I think looking beyond that, there's the investment side. The good news is the numbers, particularly if you look at the 2017 numbers, the amount of venture capital investment that went into London and UK tech was fantastic and really caught us all by surprise. So that's a very positive story. However, organizations like the European Investment Fund have not been public, but for all intents and purposes, they have stopped giving money to UK investment funds. So we need to make sure that the government, through the British Business Bank, is going to step in and fill that void. We want to make sure that, coming back to the talent piece, I'm so vocal about not sending overseas students back to their home countries so quickly. The highest percentage of overseas students in the UK are from China. And China is an incredibly important market for many reasons, including for FinTech. And so if those students are allowed to stay here, some of them will create businesses here that will trade back with their home market. So these are some of the key messages that we're focused on and pushing as we go through the course of this year.
Mm-hmm. So you are squarely focused on the UK market and progressing policy and all the necessary components to support a thriving ecosystem here in the UK. Our audience is pretty well distributed throughout the world.
Right.
I think it's of particular interest the fact that the TLA model has expanded in other countries as well. In, I guess, some of the work that you've done in setting up global tech advocates, have you seen similar challenges being experienced in other countries as well?
Yes, it is interesting because I think as I travel the world, you see a lot of similarities, but you see some key differences. And I think one of the things that I've learned is that each city or each region has its own unique DNA. London has become a very important FinTech city because we have such a depth of talent in financial services. I've also been speaking out a lot about creative tech, because London has some of the best creative talent in the world. But as I go from city to city and country to country, there are similar issues around talent, lack of talent, lack of diversity in talent. You just go to the Bay Area, it's a very common theme there, or places like New York. In terms of funding, some cities may be struggling more in terms of the level of funding that's coming in, so there's that issue. I've been to places like Bangalore, and there's wonderful talent there. There's plenty of access to funding, but the infrastructure in Bangalore is very, very challenging. Moving around the city is hard. The broadband speeds are not there. I know it's going to come and get fixed, but many of them are focused on how do they build that infrastructure to ensure that they become a very strong, vibrant tech hub. So some similarities, some differences. No, the country is dealing with the impact of Brexit and what that means. So we're kind of in a unique place there. And as I've traveled the world, I've certainly had a lot of questions from people who don't understand what it means, why it's been done, what will the outcome of that mean. So at the moment, there's a lot of confusion out there. And so when I speak with government leaders, government ministers, civil servants, a key part of my message has been the soft power message coming out of the UK at the moment is not a good one because people just don't understand what this all means. And I know for the next 12 to 18 months, it may have to be like that, but we have to be ready when we come out of the EU with a really good message that says we're open for business, that this is truly a global Britain, the way the Prime Minister articulated last year, and we have to get on the front foot with that.
Hear, hear. I will keep my personal views to myself on that subject. And I suppose the skills question, the tech skills question is probably also relevant in all the markets that you guys look at. Yes. The way that structural changes in technology is going to change economies, societies, skills that are required, obsolescence of existing skills, and increasing relevance on very short time frames of new skills.
Yes, very true. And I think some of that also comes back to where is each country or market at the moment. So, for example, if you look at the US and China, we have some very big tech companies in both countries that have huge pools of data. And that will benefit them as artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics becomes more and more sophisticated. They have big natural markets. The US is a market of 350 million people. China is a market of 1.2, 1.3 billion. So they will be important and very significant players in what I call deep tech. Saying that, cities like London will play a role in that too. I think a real catalyst for us a few years ago was when Google acquired DeepMind. And then instead of taking the business and moving it to Mountain View, Google actually transferred a lot of their AI talent to London, and London became a center of excellence for AI for them. And then what we've seen since then is a plethora of startups and scale-ups in the whole AI and deep tech space, and the talent coming in behind that really emerging. So I do think places like London will emerge in deep tech and artificial intelligence in a very strong way. But when you look at that, you also know that there's going to be winners and losers. And I say to people, look, more of the low-skill, high street retail jobs that are out there today, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. Many of them are going to disappear. And how do we prepare for that? There will be higher skill jobs in the legal profession, for example, that will go away because artificial intelligence and machine learning can take on some of the tasks that people are doing in law firms today. So you can look out and start to see where are those shifts going to take place. And the UK, I think, and our leaders are starting to think about that. I'm not sure how much that's happening in the US at this point. A lot of it is being driven by the tech giants. I think China is clearly thinking about this. Countries like Germany are as well. So they're looking out there. They're starting to understand the shifts in this landscape. And I think some countries are going to be better prepared for this than others. I've recently read an article, and there was a feature in the New York Times last year about how the US and China, in terms of deep tech and data and artificial intelligence, the big tech companies are going to get wealthier and wealthier. But what will that mean as many more jobs get taken away? And how do we as a society deal with the fact that many people will lose their jobs, and if we don't reskill them, what will happen? So in some respects, I'm very optimistic about where this is going, but in other respects, I'm nervous and pessimistic because I can see further disruption coming, and we have to be ready for that.
Mm-hmm. I think your background is fascinating, and it kind of, I suppose, explains in part how you've gotten to where you are now with the global tech advocates community and the advocacy work that you do. Can you run us through some of the highlights, the course of your long and illustrious career?
Well, I know one of the things we're talking about is FinTech, and I started my career in financial services. I spent 10 at American Express and 3 at a company called Charles Schwab. And then I made the leap into technology and telecoms. I ran the London region for a company called NTL, now Virgin Media, many years ago. I was the CEO of a later stage startup, a company called Mobileway, which was a global mobile messaging platform, and that was my first exit. The business was acquired about 10, 11 years ago. And so that was a really great moment. I was the chief marketing officer for O2 and did things like the O2, which is a great venue here in London. We were acquired by Telefonica, which was another good exit for me. And I was asked to be the global innovation director for Telefonica. So I set up a venture fund, I set up incubators, I set up an innovation community within the company, which is 230,000 people worldwide. And then I got a call that Skype was interested for me to become their vice president and general manager for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And based upon my mobile experience, to set up a mobile division in Skype, to put Skype on iPhone, Skype on Android. And we did some carrier deals with companies like Verizon Wireless, KDDI in Japan, and 3 here in the UK. And then we were bought by Microsoft. And so my kind of full-time corporate life stopped, which is great. And then my second life began, which is about giving back to the tech sector.
And just to round out your very broad, diverse range of interests, you also do some angel investing.
Yes. So I'm an angel in 3 or 4 different organizations through the EIS and SEIS scheme, which is something that the UK government introduced a few years ago, which is just excellent for angel investors. I'm a limited partner in a venture capital fund and a private equity fund.
Maybe that's a good place to drill down a little bit.
Okay.
and make it tangible. What FinTech themes do you expect to attract investors in 2018?
That's interesting. I mean, it's just, I think, I've been so fascinated by blockchain. And at the moment, as you know, there's a lot of hype leading to possibly hysteria about cryptocurrencies and what's happening there. And funny, I remember doing a Bloomberg Technology co-host spot back in August, and I was asked to talk about Bitcoin reaching 3,000, and I was like, and now I'm looking at where it is. So I think the year ahead is going to really demonstrate that cryptocurrencies are not going away, but I think there's going to be more regulation around them. We're going to have to really get our heads around it, and so I think that's going to be one aspect of this. But I think underpinning that, there's going to be a lot more interest in blockchain and blockchain capabilities. Here in London, we have some wonderful fintech unicorns, TransferWise, World Remit, Funding Circle, that have really demonstrated that we have great ability to set up fintech businesses that look at the financial services value chain and look at areas that the banks have ignored or disregarded, and have come in with great value propositions that have enabled them to grow significantly. And I'm really pleased to see the leaders of those businesses doing so well with them, because they identified opportunities along that value chain that have been ignored for years. And banks, I think, have been bemoaned for a long time. Not that they don't do good things, but I think these types of businesses are going to thrive. So I'm sure more companies will look across the fintech value chain and say, where are there opportunities? I am seeing a lot more interest in insurance, or insurtech as we call it, and actually some bigger organizations like Aviva really spending a lot of time and effort to understand how will insurance be disrupted, how can they support insurtech startups in their ecosystem. So it's a fascinating time to be in this space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I share your interest and enthusiasm for blockchain, crypto, and what the opportunities are. I think in 2018, token prices aside, we'll continue to see some interesting protocol layer development work, and it really feels like it's the infrastructure phase for building out of that ecosystem. And specifically this year, I would expect a lot more work around KYC, digital identity, compliance, token issuance as a service, to bring a bit more rigor to that space.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think in addition to all of that, I mean, I really think that we're going to have to come up with a better exchange for how this all works. I'm sure there will be a degree of regulation that comes in. We talk about reg tech. But I do think if we can get some of those fundamentals in place and have a way to deal with more of the volatility and potentially the lack of liquidity, that will get a lot of investors very excited to say, okay, I can see a future path for this. This is not, just this outlandish, crazy investment Ponzi type scheme, which is what some people are calling it, but it is really going to be a much more stable way forward. Digital assets, all of this for me is a digital asset. That is not going away. That is, as we become digital economies, as we become digital nations, people will want to hold digital assets, and Bitcoin and the various other aspects of cryptocurrencies will be something that we will have in the future. It's not going away.
The elephant in the room in a lot of fintech conversations is security, not least as open banking rolls out across Europe. Blockchain and crypto experimentation continues to ramp up, and even things like for the developments in quantum computing, potentially force us to reconsider encryption techniques. Is FinTech ready to withstand the increasing complexity of cybersecurity and potentially growing threat of cyber attack?
Is anybody truly ready? I'm not quite so sure. I think if there's any sector or tech vertical that is ready, it's probably the FinTech space. Although there's clearly room for improvement, there's no room for complacency. The attacks, the cyber elements of this are going to continue to get more and more sophisticated. And so leaders of these businesses need to be ready. I actually think the bigger challenges is for the larger corporates who may not be in the FinTech space, but just in the broader business category. Are these businesses really doing enough to ensure that they are protected, that their infrastructure is working well, that they really know and understand this? I mean, there's a great organization called Hacker House run by an advocate called Jennifer Arcuri. And I love her model because she works with and trains ethical hackers to go in and work with companies and, in a very illustrative way, demonstrate how easy it is to attack their infrastructure, and then to sit down with them and say, this is how easy it is, and this is what you need to do to fix it. I went to one of her events 3 years ago, and Mayor Boris Johnson, he was mayor at the time, was there, and she had one of her ethical hackers do a live demo on stage. The company had agreed to it up front. And within 5 minutes, he was into their website. And, you just watch this. And I was looking around and people's jaws were dropping and how easy and seamless he made it. And you just think, wow, that if you just multiply that out, there's so many people who can do that. So I do think, coming back to your point, FinTech businesses, because they have to look at encryption, and encryption needs to work really, really well, are probably better prepared, but they probably still need to double down on their efforts. Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate we've kind of moved quickly from one topic to another. You're someone with interesting views across a lot of subject matter areas. Maybe it would be most interesting to dig a bit deeper into the changing technology landscape across societies, and think a bit about what governments, what existing institutions, what school systems, university systems should be doing to prepare society for this, what some of the consequences of not doing it right would be. On that note, I understand that this week you addressed the House of Lords Special Committee on Economic Affairs, so part of the UK Parliament, to discuss the changing technology landscape and its implications for the UK.
Yes.
We can probably extrapolate that scope to most developed and even emerging countries. What was your message to the Lords about how the tech landscape is changing?
Well, it started with, it is changing, and it's changing faster than you can imagine. And, when you present to a select committee at the House of Lords, they're there for life. And so there were many older members of the House of Lords there who may not have been as familiar with the digital and technology landscape. But that said, the questions were excellent. So it was to really give them a sense of, this is what's happening in FinTech, or this is how AI is going to disrupt matters. So I tried to make it very real for them. But I also then said, we have to bring this back and look at our secondary school education process, what colleges and what universities are doing or what they're not doing to prepare graduates who are going into the world of work. And, I did share with them the feedback that I get from employers who are very frustrated that the depth of the talent pool is not there. Yes, there are good coders and programmers and data people coming out of universities, but even though they may have some of those harder skills, they could be lacking the softer skills. We also need people who are great problem solvers, who are good team leaders, who have great communication skills. And is that really being embraced in our colleges and universities? Is the curriculum too narrow? Because one of the things that we do know is that, the jobs that are going to be offered 5 years from now, we don't even know about today. So how do we build students and young people who are able to be flexible and adaptable for this ever-changing world of work? So I went through some scenarios around that. But we also talked about how it's important for businesses. And I said, businesses need to really step up here to work with secondary schools and to go in and talk about career guidance and career advice and to paint a picture of what the future jobs are going to look like. I mean, nobody has a crystal ball where they can say, yep, these are all the jobs that are going to be out there. But there are lots of businesses who have a better understanding of what the future of work is going to look like. If we can bring that back into our secondary schools, working with students, teachers, and career advisors to say, these are the types of jobs that are going to be out there in 5 or 10 years. These are the types of harder skills we need you to have, but also think about the softer skills. And my other point in the select committee was, it's not just about STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I talked about STEAM, the A. There's the artistic side of this. We still need people who have great artistic skills, who have great design skills, who have great content skills. They're great writers, whatever. There will be jobs for people like those. I talked a bit about user experience, user interface. We struggle to fill those jobs today. So it was painting that picture. But then the other element of this was, and there's some really great questions around lifelong learning. And my message in there was to say, look, I know we're focusing on the student side of this. That was the brief. But we really need to ensure that somebody who's 50-something like me with gray hair, who kind of gets to a point in their career and they say, I'm not skilled for this anymore. What do I do? How do I get re-skilled? And one of the topics was, should the government look at offering some type of tertiary loan program where if you're 40 or 50, you could borrow money at a very low interest rate, go and get educated or skilled in a certain area, and then go back into the world of work. And I said, that would be amazing, because we need to start with our younger people to say, this is a lifelong journey. Somebody said to me the other day, we work with a lot of people with our financial assets. We have financial advisors and we talk to our banker, whatever. But are we really doing the same with our intelligence assets? And are we really thinking about, as we move through the world of work, what are the assets that we bring when it comes to our skills, our competencies, and our intelligence in certain areas? And how do we keep refreshed on those? And so that was the nature of the discussion, and it was terrific to be there for that.
That's interesting, that the point about managing the financial assets, because there's this concept that you kind of have potential wealth early in your career, and it represents what your lifelong income is likely to be, and that potential wealth becomes realized tangible wealth as you work and earn. As you point out, we manage the tangible wealth once you've earned it. Yeah. But there's, once you leave university,
yes,
there's no support in terms of managing, maximizing that potential wealth, is there?
No. Well, what we did do, we touched a bit on apprenticeships and the apprenticeship levy, and then we also talked about professional development, because there are some organizations who I think do a very good job at investing in their employees in terms of their professional development. So that is an opportunity for some, but not for all. And I think particularly if you're working in a startup, a scale-up, a small business, you can miss out on that. Or it's really incumbent upon you as the individual to go out and really find out, well, what do you need training on? What skills do you need to have? People who've come, finishing one aspect of their career in the later part of their life, but saying, gosh, I have to work till I'm 70, so I've got another 15 or 20 years to go. The types of jobs I was trained for no longer apply. So that whole aspect came into the discussion.
And did you find that members on a committee like that, and maybe it's an even slightly broader question as you engage with various parts of public sector and private sector, I mean, were these individuals kind of nodding along thinking, yeah, it would be interesting if this happens the way you say it will? Or were they saying, yes, we agree that this is an inevitability and something that we need to be putting tangible responses in place for now?
I think it was more the latter. Yeah. And I think, hence the reason for the actual meeting. And, even though it was largely a very different generation in that room, many of them, I think, really were grasping the impact of what this could mean. And I also brought on the point about, lots of jobs going away. And, what does that mean in terms of the potential social unrest? The inequality that exists out there. We have to be prepared for that. So I certainly walked out of that thinking, the questions were great. I really hope that they work on that to turn that into a tangible plan for what the country needs to do. So, and I have to say, over the past 12 months, I've been through a lot of government agencies, DCMS, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, BAYS, Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Department for International Trade, questions are great. The insights, the discussions about where this is all going. A lot of people in our public sector seem to get it and understand it, which is really positive. The challenge is, how do we address this? And the other point I made this week was, look, let's not recreate the wheel here. There are many, many grassroots organizations out there, for example, working with schools. There's Teen Tech, there's Founders for Schools. Sherry Kutu, who's the author of the Scale Up Report, just launched her Work Finder app, which is a great app for anybody any student in the country who wants to get work experience. There's Code First Girls, Code Club, I mean, you name it. And so my message to them was, look, there are great, great organizations who already understand this, who already know how to train and skill people. Let's get behind them. Let's give them more resources so that they can expand to do things nationwide, because speed is of the essence here. This is changing faster than we all think.
You clearly have such a comprehensive grasp on these challenges and some of the tools at our disposal in terms of how to address these. I mean, in your head, potentially you distinguish between shorter term and longer term solutions to specifically to the talent challenge, the retraining, upskilling challenge. I mean, I guess there's probably an immigration policy component. There's the retraining component.
Yes.
What's society's responsibility for that? What's corporations' responsibility for that if they're replacing human workers with automation?
Yes.
And then that educational piece, i.e., someone born today, how should their experience perhaps be different than someone who was born in the 1930s or 50s or 70s or 90s?
Yes. No, that's absolutely right. I think it is a challenge, but it is an opportunity, and I can see both sides of this. And when I left the Select Committee, I mean, my last comment was, I truly think if we adopt even half of what we're talking about and move forward on it, we will be well on our way to becoming a digital nation. We're not going to capture everyone, but if we can reach out to more and more people and help them to understand where this is going, the impact of this, because digital and tech is not going away. And sometimes it's hard, and we can see that in our political environment and through some of the recent elections, what people are saying. It's really hard because they're feeling and sensing this enormous change, and that things are moving so quickly. And from where I sit, I think they're going to actually get even faster. So how do we take people with us on this journey, and how do we ensure that, even older folks say, look, there's a role for you in this. You may not necessarily be trained to be a coder, but if you've worked in business and industry for 20 or 30 years, you offer something to the table. If you've managed teams, if you've coached people, if you've mentored people, these businesses still need that. The other message I conveyed was that even though a lot of jobs are going to go away because of automation and technology, there will still be other jobs where human interface and human interaction is going to be important, and frankly, even more important. So you almost have this kind of dichotomy of intense automation, technology behind everything that we do, no drivers in cars. But then you have this sense of people are going to still want and need and crave that human interaction, especially as our society gets older and older. We're going to need people to help with older people. We're still going to need people who are chefs. My middle son's a chef. Well, I don't see that going away anytime soon. You're going to need teachers to teach and explain things. Yes, you can do stuff online, but my most inspiring people in my life were some of my teachers who really got me to think differently. That's not going away. So I'm very optimistic about that, but I also worry that people will become disenfranchised and frustrated by what this all means, and that will create problems too.
Yeah. It seems to be one of the biggest challenges facing societies and facing governments who want to help help deal with some of these challenges is that, well, it's a simple question of what is the role of government in managing these changes. Because in many cases, one of the frustrating components is you have people who are maybe less open to these eventualities.
Yes.
Who aren't taking the steps that they could now in order to attain new skills, frankly, because we're human beings. One, we're generally fearful of change. Two, there's this anchoring bias that kind of keeps the present front and center in our
Yes.
minds and makes it difficult to imagine what a future might look like,
Yes.
how things might change. So the question is, what's the role of government in stepping in and ensuring people make these sorts of moves?
Yes.
Versus establishing
letting it happen.
something like establishing something like a universal basic income and then just letting people fend for themselves.
Yes. I think, funny, the more I learn about that, the more I think that is coming. It's going to have to come in some way, shape, or form. And I am very much a believer in the private sector and in the whole model of capitalism, but it doesn't work everywhere. And so we have to be prepared for that. But coming back to your point on government, I think both government and business, we need good leaders to explain this and share this. And sadly, I think the trust in our government leaders and in our business leaders is not where it needs to be. So some of these folks can speak out, but the level of trust that's behind them or conveyed to them is not there. So we have to keep working on that. So we need courageous leaders who will come out and say, this is where this is going, and this is why you need to think about this for you, for your family, in terms of your future preparation for this. And I think that would go down very well. A couple of examples on the political side. He's now our culture secretary. He was our digital minister, Matt Hancock. Is one of the very strong leaders I've come across who's very good about explaining this. And he's now in a cabinet level role. And I really am pleased for that, because he's been out in the tech community talking a lot, not just about the disruption, but the lack of inequality, the issues around the lack of diversity in the sector. And he gets this and understands this. Our Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, I think really understands this and has been very outspoken on these topics. So we do have leaders who are willing to do that. We need to do the same on the business side. I've been watching some of the recent comments from Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, and I'm applauding what he's saying. Was it a bit too late? Yes, I do think it was, but he's now on the page where he recognizes the really important impact that Facebook is having on so many different aspects of society. And I think the way he's now presenting it is very refreshing, and we need more leaders to speak like that. And that's not easy to do. And sometimes they can get shot down pretty quickly by the media or members from the public or on Twitter to say, what is he saying? He doesn't make any sense, or what she's saying is a load of rubbish. But we have to do that so that more and more people understand. We have to paint that picture for people so that they understand, where is this going and why is it relevant to me as an individual. And I think if we can keep doing that, and if government can help with that, I'm a real believer that government's primary role is one around policy to enable things to happen. But in a few key areas like education and healthcare, they have a really significant role to play, and they need to help the population understand the magnitude of what's coming.
Yeah. Well, that's I think really well put, and the kind of a thought that you inspired in me in walking through that was basically that we talk about leaders and a country's leaders and our elected officials being our leaders, but in so many cases they're not leading in terms of looking forward and helping make decisions for society about how things are going to be different in the future and what we need to be doing now to respond to that. They're bureaucrats in a lot of cases. I think your point's a very good one about government's role in a lot of areas is around policy. Yes. So putting the right framework in place, administering. But yeah, I think we, as societies, as citizens, as voters, need to appreciate that we do need leaders in certain areas, and we should elect politicians who are capable and willing to lead, and we should support them in doing so.
No, I agree. I think on the point about policy, I think before policy can be developed and implemented, people need to understand what is going on out there. And so some of these people I spoke about, do show a really good understanding of that. Others that I've met show less of an understanding. So when we look at the policy that they're working on, does that policy really reflect what's happening? The issue around policy and government approach to this is because this is changing so quickly. I mean, if you look at education, we're now teaching coding as part of the ICT curriculum, and Britain was the first G7 country to do that, and I applaud the government on that. But the wheels are still moving even faster. So how do we ensure that our education curriculum is keeping pace with that? And so, the government here has a very significant voice in the educational curriculum. Are they keeping up to speed? Are they really moving this in the right way? So we have to call them out on that. And so that's one aspect of it. But I feel like one key role that I play is I find a lot of wonderful leaders and role models who are some unsung heroes doing amazing things. I think about Sarah Luxford, who runs our TLA Women in Tech group. I think about one of my advisors, a chap called Mark Martin, who runs UK Black Tech and at Urban Teacher, who spends a huge amount of his time working in schools in East London in deprived communities, getting young people and their parents to understand why having a digital skills understanding and experience is so critical for these young people. Those are the real role models and the leaders that are out there who are making a difference. And so I feel like part of my role is how do I connect those people who see this day in and day out into the people who are making policy and thinking about the future direction, so that when that policy comes out, it's fit for purpose from day one and really reflects the reality of what's going on out there. And doing that sounds easy, but it's not easy. And those government leaders who are able to do that and grasp that, I think are the ones we really should hold on a pedestal and say they're doing a terrific job. They're not going to get everything right, but if they can get the bulk of it correct as they implement it, that's what we need.
That sounds to me like as good a place as any to wrap up. Okay. Russ, what's the best way for people to find out more about your work and connect with you?
Sure. If you go onto the website, techlondonadvocates.org.uk, there's information about the group, there's information about me, there's also information about Global Tech Advocates, so that's the best way to reach me. Or follow me on Twitter at Russ Shaw1 or at techlondonadv.
Great. Russ Shaw, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, FinTech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.